I was recently on a Zoom with Jenna Carells and Daryl Carter in Sacramento. Certainly enjoyed my time with you guys. And so Jenna asks a very common question: how do I move up quickly? Okay, how do I get ahead faster? And I think there's really two questions in that. How do I get ahead? Okay, that's really one part of the question. And the second question is, how do I get ahead with velocity? How do I speed this up? And I think that's a fair question. I mean, no matter what industry you're an entry-level accountant, an entry-level attorney. I mean, listen, I want to get ahead and I want to get ahead quickly. I don't want to be complacent and I don't want to get stuck. So I think it's fair. When I started asking Jenna some questions, well, Jenna, how long have you been in the business? Well, a little over 2 years. And a lot of times I get the impression from people that there's some anxiety, like there must be something wrong with me if I'm not getting ahead quicker, because the way it was presented to me, here's the time frames. Here's how you move up the ladder, and here's how long it should take. So if it's taking me longer than was presented, there must be something wrong with me. And I think a lot of leaders go through this, right? Oh, I've been a leader for 6 months and I don't have anybody on my team yet. There must be something wrong with me. And listen, maybe there's poor messaging coming from the leadership in our business that, it's all about the time frames, because it's not. The business is a marathon. Okay, it's not a race, it's a marathon. I mean, whoever crosses the finish line is a winner. Whether you run the marathon in 2.5 hours or you run it in 3 or 4, listen, you ran a marathon. I mean, you should feel great about that. So there isn't necessarily a race to management, a race to consultant. It is a marathon. So I've got a handful of thoughts I want to share with you guys here today. So here's my first thought when I hear people that have been in the business a long time and they're not where they want to be yet. My first thought is, good for you. I mean, feel proud of yourself. You've been in the business for X period of time. I mean, you've proven to yourself, you've proven to everybody, you know how to take a punch. I mean, there's a lot of people that at the first sight of adversity, they bow out, but not you. You've been through the gauntlet a little bit. You've survived a rough sales week. You've survived hiring and losing people. You've survived that. So rather than getting down on yourself, again, my first thought is, hey, give yourself a little pat on the back. Good for you. You got a strong jaw here. You know how to take a punch. Feel good about that. My second thought with Jenna is, listen, I can relate, right? I was all about speed. I looked at the field like it was a jail sentence and I got to just do some hash marks in my jail cell and just wait for the time to go by so the real position of running an office could kick in. I mean, I don't recommend that mindset for anybody, but because I was so focused on speed, right? I got to hit the numbers. I got to get the people on my crew. I developed a house of cards. As I got promoted to assistant management, the whole team just sort of crumbled apart, and then I'm eating a big piece of humble pie as a new assistant manager that just lost his crew, and I got to do it all over again. So again, I can relate, been there, done that, and maybe this is why I feel so strongly. Don't focus on speed, okay? If you're focusing on speed, you might get it, but the consequence of that could be your team could be falling apart. My third thought is kind of an embarrassing story, but here goes. Many years ago, 14 years ago, Joanne and I are having our first child, and so be it. The Nolans are having their first child, Joe and Melissa. And so they're born 3 days apart. So for argument's sake, they're exactly the same age. And around 9 months into these boys being, little boys, I take a trip to Austin, Texas, and I'm hanging out with the Nolans. I'm enjoying them and being new parents with their new boy. And their boy, Chase, happens to be walking. Now, my son, Dane, was glued to the floor, okay? He liked his little trucks and he liked his cars, and he had no interest in standing, looking around, and maybe going for a walk. So he was very slow. It took him around 16 to 18 months to walk, right? And so, I don't know if it's the competitive dad in me or what it is, but I remember coming home and saying to Joanne, I'm like, hey, listen, what's wrong with Dane? He's again glued to the floor. I just came back from Austin and, Chase is walking around. He's doing his thing. And Joanne asks me, she says, are you concerned that Dane will never walk? I'm like, well, no, that thought never really crossed my mind. I know he'll walk. She goes, Well, then why are you making a big deal about it? Why is this a concern for you? And so only a great spouse will help someone realize how much of a dummy they really are. I mean, that was a great question to ask me. And I'm like, yeah, why am I caught up on speed? At the end of the day, my son will walk, and here we are today at the age of 14. He runs all over the place. He runs to catch touchdowns. He runs to steal bases. He's got no problem with walking. Yet I was so concerned about that. I was caught up in that. Just the wrong thing to be looking at is speed. It's going to happen, okay? So you've got to give yourself a little bit of a break. Maybe that's the lesson here. It's going to happen. It's a foregone conclusion. Just relax a little bit and don't be so focused on speed. And my final thought for you is the uber successful people that you meet. All right? You're going to meet lots of successful people throughout your life. And I've noticed a commonality with the uber successful people. And the commonality is this. When you reminisce about the good old days, man, is there a sparkle, a light in their eye? They get lit up like Christmas trees, okay? And there's something to be said for that when, again, you're talking about the good old days when they had nothing. Like when I think of the most successful person I've ever had a chance to sit down and talk with, it was Steve Wozniak, okay? So the co-founder of Apple was Steve Jobs. And so I'm having dinner, luckily enough, with Steve, and there's a handful of us, but I had plenty of one-on-one time with him. He sat right beside me at the dinner table. And so, of course, I'm just totally intrigued with what was that like, starting this computer business, out of a garage and having that thing grow to become just such a dominant business. And, what was Steve Jobs like? And so all these questions. And so, again, here you're talking to a guy who's a multi-billionaire that could be doing anything that he wants to be doing. And I had the impression that if he had a chance to trade his current life today with that life back in the early 20s when he had nothing, of course, in a heartbeat, he'd trade his success for those good old days where all he had was his PhD, poor, hungry, and determined. Right? So I think there's a tell in that for those of us that are anxious as we're in those PhD moments and you're striving to become successful, I mean, most of us will never be Steve Wozniak successful. We've got our own picture of what success looks like. But those uber successful people give us an indicator that really it's the journey that's so pleasurable. It's the process, it's the grind that they could be arguably the best years of your life. So why are you in such a rush? Kind of reminds you a little bit of kids growing up, like they just can't wait to get older. Right? Like my kids talk about, I can't wait to get my driver's license. I can't wait to live on my own. And a good part of me as a parent's like, you have no idea how good you have it. Like, enjoy this time, slow it down. Again, I think that's a great tell. I think it's a great lesson for all of us. Enjoy that process. Easier said than done. I get it. But think of the uber successful people. Man, they reminisce about those good old days. So enjoy those good old days. Don't be so anxious. Don't be so caught up on speed. It will happen. Just relax and enjoy.